Williams. I work for the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts as an attorney doing civil rights work, focusing mostly on racial justice issues. And I also do a lot of volunteer work for the National Lawyers Guild, which is a group of radical lawyers, legal workers, and law students supporting civil and human rights in Massachusetts and across the country, I guess. So Horace asked me to come and do a bit of a Know Your Rights training, which the Guild does all the time for folks. There are things that are your rights, and which we're going to talk about a little bit, and then there's things that I kind of categorize as obedience training, right? And that's like telling people to speak quietly and to put their hands in a gentle position and to respect authority and use the term sir or ma'am. No one ever wrote any of those things in any state constitution or our federal constitution. So those things are not your rights. So if someone says, I'm going to do Know Your Rights training and starts telling you those things, or you see a document that says those things, it's false advertising, right? Because that isn't in the Constitution anywhere. Someone says, well, that is a right. You do have a right to that thing. And someone else says, no, you don't. That's not a right. So, and I would always wonder how to sort of navigate that. So now, the way I navigate that is I ask this question: what are rights? Like, where do they come from? Where would you say rights come from? And there are a number of different answers for them. There are natural, God-given rights, if you want to believe in those. There are human rights, and there are civil rights. And one of the questions I ask, if people don't, if it's younger folks or folks who don't want to answer, I sometimes ask, like, if I leave the country and I go to Nigeria, or I go to Brazil, or I go to Panama, are my rights the same as my rights here, right? And some people will say yes, right? If it's God-given rights, you can be like, well, it's the same God, so it's the same book, so they're the same rights. And some people will say absolutely not, no, because if you're talking about civil rights, someone's going to say no, they're not the same rights. What I'm going to talk about, in essence, is really the civil rights part. It comes from the amendments to the Constitution, right? So the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, are protections for people against government intrusion. Have people seen The Big Lebowski? There's a scene in it where one of the characters, John Goodman, is yelling at one of the other characters, and the waitress is like, can you be, because he's screaming in a diner, and the waitress is like, can you be quiet? Can you please not do that? And he starts yelling about his First Amendment rights, and he's like, the Supreme Court has roundly rejected prior restraint, which is actually a true statement, and it shows a pretty deep understanding of the First Amendment, but he's completely wrong because he's in a diner, and the woman running the diner is telling him to shut up, which she has every right to do. Because if you were in my house and I said, I don't like when people talk about things that are blue, I don't like it. So if you use the word blue, if you use any shade of the word blue, you have to get the hell out of my house. Can I do that? Yeah, but you have First Amendment right, don't you? Then like go to Boston Common and do it. Go outside, you do it in public. Like you do it, you can say you hate Trump, you can say you love Trump, you can say you don't like the mayor, you can say you hate the mayor in public. If you do it in my house, that's not the government. But if the government tries to censor what you say, if you said, I'm gonna print up a bunch of flyers and pass them out, and the government's like, we don't like what you're saying, then you got a beef. Then you should call the ACLU. Then you can say something about it. So really, the way to think about it, you have a shield, right? But it's kind of a magic shield. It only works in certain circumstances. It only works to protect you from actions of the government. Religious freedom, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and freedom to petition the government for redress. Those are all the protections in the First Amendment. There are protections in the Second Amendment, which has recently changed to say that people have an individual right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment is incredibly important, is people's right to be secure in their persons and their property and their effects. Modernly, that would be cell phones and bank accounts and your papers at home and actually your house. The fact that police aren't allowed to stop you, frisk you, search you, detain you, seize you, go in your house, your trailer, your car, your glove compartment, into your phone, without proper authority. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about is actually the Fourth Amendment, because that's how people interact with the state. And the most likely actor when people interact with the state are the police, right? Police, FBI, immigration, through, and I counted words in the Constitution. So the unamended Constitution, the body of the Constitution of the United States of America as it was originally signed, is about like 4,300 and something words, right? If you count the words that just have to do with race and just have to do with owning human beings, So just words that are explicitly about race, and I'll have you know that none of the words that are explicitly about race are good. They're all just that horrible things that happen to people, and how people are not really counted as human beings, or counted partially as human beings, right? So the 3/5 clause for proportional representation in states that said African Americans counted 3/5 of a human being. People might think those things aren't in the Constitution. They're in the Constitution. Because when you amend the Constitution, you don't take out words, you just add words to the bottom, and you say, that thing up there doesn't really count anymore, this is the new thing. But those words are still, the fact that African Americans, black people in this country, count as 3/5 of a human being is written in stone in buildings like downtown. It's written on the oldest pieces of paper that people revere. So I was just at an event, someone said, the Constitution of the United States is the most perfect document ever written in human history. I was like, it says we're not human beings. So I say that because it's funny. And then the second reason I say that is because I'm about to depend on that document for all of the things that I'm going to say. So it's shaky ground, right? And I think it's important to realize that. Because a lot of times people come to me and they say, it's my constitutional right, I should be able to sue, this should happen. And I'm like, but all of the things that should protect us cannot be contained in this document. And if you expect them to be, we're going to be disappointed, right? So actually I was saying the math, so it's about 4,300 words, about 450 of those words, so about 10% of the document are just about owning human beings and just explicitly about race, and that is of Native folks and black folks. And all of it is bad, right? There are parts of when the Constitution was originally written, there are parts that I was going to say the founders, the framers, were a slightly different set of old Christian, white, landowning, slave-owning men than the founders, who were a group of white Christian, slave-owning, literate men. So slightly different group. They said, there are parts of this Constitution that you cannot amend for a number of years. No matter what, you cannot amend them. The only unamendable parts were parts about owning human beings. They were like the age of the president, the fact that we have a Senate, the fact that we have a House of Representatives, the fact that they can create a judiciary, the fact there's a triumvirate, that there are 3 branches and they're co-equal branches and they have checks and balances. That's like really important. How many people learn those things in grammar school and in high school and in college and in graduate school? Did anybody say the most important thing, but arguably, that means I want to argue about it, the most important thing in the United States Constitution is owning human beings and the concept of race in this country. The most important. Anywhere in school do they say that's most of the more than anything else, that is the Constitution. Because when they wrote the Constitution, that was a really important part, and they were like, no, we want to put more about owning human beings. And some other people were like, because you imagine if that's the amount that's in there, there were some people who were like, no, we need these a lot more than that. And some people were like, nah, maybe we only need 10% of it to be about that. So the ACLU of Massachusetts, my boss particularly, and some other folks from the National Lawyers Guild, went to court that night. The night of, was the 24th, 23rd of January, when the Muslim ban, I call it the Muslim ban particularly because it's not a travel ban, because it had a real reason, and he said a real reason, and that was actually the legal point. We went into court that night. It was midnight on a Saturday night, because you can do that sometimes and call a judge for an emergency restraining order. We went into court, and the argument was exactly that, to say that this country does not have a religion. The argument was this Muslim ban, originally one on 7 countries, is put in effect to keep Muslims out of this country. And that is a violation, strangely, because it has to violate someone's rights who's here, because I can't argue a case about, like, someone in Pakistan doing something to someone in India and say, hey, I have the United States Constitution. Everyone's gonna be like, well, who cares? It doesn't affect those people. So we had to argue on behalf of relatives. So here's this American citizen. They have a husband, wife, spouse, other person, daughter, son, who's in Iran. That person is trying to come to the United States. And you have this document that discriminates against this person who's in the United States, because of the religion that she and her family belong to. You cannot do that. We also were in front of 2 judges, which never happens in federal court, which was weird, but they were like, we'll agree on whatever we do. And they said, yes, you're right, this does discriminate. Later, however, 10 days later, we lost. However, our colleagues in Washington State and Hawaii won, and that ban was struck down. There are trial level federal courts and there are appellate federal courts. So the Fourth Circuit just said, you're right, which the Fourth Circuit is a really conservative circuit court. And they said, you're right, this does. In their language, they said this drips of, I think, I might be getting the words wrong, but this is a decision which drips of ethnocentrism and religious bigotry. The Fourth Circuit is probably one of the most conservative courts. It's probably as conservative as the Supreme Court is now. And they said, you're right, this is the case. So it looks like that's going to go to the Supreme Court. However, the defendant in that case, if that person was someone who I was representing and they were defendant in the case, I would say, you need to shut up, I'm taking your phone, you need to stop talking on Twitter. Because he keeps saying, the defendant is Donald Trump, and he keeps saying, that's why we need less Muslims in this country, and look what happened in London, and this is terrible, this is why we need a ban. His lawyer's argument was, this isn't a ban. If you call it a ban, they're much more likely to lose in court, and they kept calling it, and he got on Twitter and called it a ban, which is not good for their case. That's where civil rights work comes in. That's where human rights work comes in, because we say, here are the things that are supposed to be upheld, that they wrote, right? But here's the practice. And really bridging that gap, whether it's religious discrimination, whether it's LGBTQ identity discrimination, racial discrimination, class-based discrimination, gender discrimination. We want to try to bring that into, some people believe we are. It's like, everything's nice, and we really are to the ideals written in parts of the Constitution. But many of us know the truth, and that really isn't the case. Because sometimes there's a lot of pressure on a police department, sometimes there's a lot of political pressure, sometimes there's a lot of legal pressure, because they're like, holy crap, if we go to court on this, we're gonna get crushed, and we don't wanna go to court. So depending on where, stuff that happened in Albuquerque, stuff that happened in Los Angeles, stuff that's happened in Chicago, stuff that's happened in Ferguson. In those cities, there are actually some kind of strong ones that are assigned out of federal courts, and the problem is the enforcement of it. Yeah. To say, did you do it? And they drag them back in court, and they say they didn't do it. And the court's like, well, maybe let's give them a chance to try again. They're a positive step, and it's one of the very few tools that we have. But now the federal government isn't going to back them up. The federal government isn't going to come in and say, hey, we're gonna get you because you're not following, you city are not doing what you agreed with us, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division thing to say. They're dropping them all. I don't actually know specifically the ones in Chicago, in Ohio and other places, but every one of them, they're not going to back up any of those. And the cities know it. The cities are like, okay, we agreed to have body cameras. Who's going to sue us? Sessions is going to come? Sessions is going to come and say, beat the hell out of people, right? In the private meeting, they're going to go, do whatever you want, right? The city is probably more progressive now than the DOJ is, where it was the other way around before. There's what our rights are, and there's how we can use those to resist police violence, right? And you put those two things together, and I think there's really, in the last 2-3 years, it's been a new day because for decades it happened, and people from about 1975 to maybe 2.5-3 years ago, people were just sort of we have to live this way, it sucks, if I see the police, I'm gonna run, right? That's how people lived for a while. But I think now we can resist that, and I think there's a collective will to, I'm gonna use the word fight back, but you know what I mean, fight back, to resist in ways that we historically have and to create new forms of resistance. People know how many police there are. What's a guess? How many police? 600,000? 600,000 people in Boston, but then how many police?
Oh, in Boston?
Yeah.
You said 3,500.
Yeah, see, you knew, because I said that too. So it's about 3,000 police and about 3,500 employees. Hey, so you do that math. There's a police officer for every 200 people in Boston. It's you could just stand there and be like, this is your classroom of people, your 200 people, make sure they don't break the law, right? That's an astonishing number, right?
Especially where they're concentrated.
Yeah, and you're thinking, if it's hey, nope, there's no police in Beacon Hill, and if there are, they're just giving people directions, or they're keeping, you all out of Beacon Hill. If you think of it that way, it's wow, that's an enormous number of people, right? And if you think of, it's an outrageous payroll, right? To give, every year, and they just said, I think 35 new or something, 35 or 40 new police officers. And if you think that amount of money, right, to pay for, rehabilitation, drug treatment, college scholarships, building new schools, paying teachers, that would go a long, long way. Summer jobs, and everybody knows, for every one cop you don't have, you could hire probably 10 or 20 well-paid summer jobs for like high school age youth. The racial bias that's going to be involved, aside from the mass incarceration that's going to be involved in that, right? You're just going to keep putting people in jail and prison. It's a short-term, it's not a solution, so I barely want to call it a short-term solution. But you're just saying like, there's crime, more cops, right? But if people have opportunities, if people have lives, if people have education, I also don't want to say that they're not going to commit crimes, because this kind of indicates that there's a certain set of people who commit crimes and there are a certain set of people who don't. Where actually, if you look at a lot of the crimes that people are arrested for, right? If you look at domestic violence, if you look at drug buying and selling of drugs and possession of drugs, those are flat line, right? Like kids that are going to school at Harvard, who are going to buy illegal Adderall to sell to study with. They're going to buy coke. They're going to buy weed. They don't come to Cape Verdean kids at Upham's Corner to buy. First of all, if you tried to buy Adderall, people will be like, "What's Adderall?" If you said, "Oh, like I need some powder cocaine," they're going to be like, "We don't sell powder cocaine here. Go somewhere else," right? That doesn't happen. Also, if that happens, it happens one time in like 10,000 because someone doesn't know where to go and they just came into town and they drive to the hood because they think that's where you get drugs. And then very weird things happen, like people get robbed and all these. I had a couple of those cases. Very strange things happen when you do that. But those kids buy drugs from people who are their same race, their same class, and their same age, right? Everyone knows that. Like when people buy drugs, maybe not you, but your cousins buy drugs, they buy drugs from people who are the same race, the same class, about the same age, and speak the same language. And that's flat across, buying and selling drugs. It's a flat line all the way across races and classes in geography. But we see who, go into, downtown, go into BMC, Boston Municipal Court, Central Division downtown, on a Monday, sit there through an arraignment session and watch who gets arraigned for drugs. It's all black and brown people. Because it's like, we hire all these police because we say there's a lot of crime, but it's not even about crime, it's about a certain set of people committing crime. Essentially, police can't stop you, police can't search you, police can't search and frisk are different things, we'll talk about that. Police can't frisk you, police can't take your property, they can't look in your golf compartment, they can't look in your bag, they can't come into your house at all unless there's some kind of exception or they meet some kind of high barrier. They have a burden to show that there is some, and those are some terms that we've heard, like reasonable suspicion and probable cause. So if we were outside on the street and the police rolled up and they said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'd be like, "Walking away from you." That's what I'm doing. Police have no right to stop you, legal right to stop you, search you, frisk you, seize your goods and property, look into your phone, search your pockets at all. If they have nothing, they can do nothing. They can legally do nothing. Those sort of evidentiary burdens are here. And then what you need to get those are facts, right? You have to say like, I can tell you all the ones, because I read way too many police reports. I probably read 2,500 police reports in my life. They say there was a bulge in someone's pocket and the outline looked like a weapon. They say people blade their bodies. So that's the thing, like, I need to hold something. So if I have something and I'm not supposed to have this thing, and let's say there's a cookie and I'm a little kid and you're a mom and you say, "Do you have a cookie?" Say that.
Do you have a cookie?
And you do this. So everyone knows this. This is called blading your body. I didn't know that. Because I think it's because you do it in fencing, like you turn the thin side of your body, but you try to hide something behind your body. That's called blading your body. They say the suspect bladed his body. They did the other thing that allegedly people do when they have illicit things in their pockets. They do a security. You know when you walk out of the house and you do this thing, you go, "Do I have my keys, my wallet, my whatever else, my phone?" I guess. That's called a security. If it's for a weapon, it's called a security check because you go like this, or like you go like that to see if it's falling down or something. Allegedly, people do this when they have guns. I don't really think it's true, but there's a whole bunch of police training that says that. So they always write, "The person bladed their body." They always write, "The person did a security check." They always write, if the person had really baggy jeans and they're running away from the police, they say he kept pulling at his waistband because allegedly that's also something that would happen if you had illicit things in your pockets, like you would pull at your waistband so your pants don't fall down. I don't know. But they write that, and judges believe it. They go, "Oh, that's what someone would do if they had," and they say they saw an outline. A lot of times, if it's drug related, they say they saw what looked like a hand-to-hand transaction with somebody. There's another thing called a ride to nowhere. So someone gets in someone's car, they drive halfway up the block and the person gets out, right? Which seems weird, like if someone did that, and police say, "Oh, that's what drug dealers do. They pick someone up in a car, they do the transaction in the car, they drive a little bit, and then they drive around the block and they drop the person off." So they say that. If it's in a car, they say that like the person was like kicking something under the seat or kept reaching under the seat because obviously if you got pulled over by the cops, you would wait until the cop comes to the window, and then you'd be like, oh, let me hide my gun under the seat now that the cop is standing at the window. But they always say, like, I mean, obviously you would have like 3 minutes before the cop drove up, right? But police always, whenever they find a gun in the car, they say, oh, we saw the person bend over and put something under the seat. And then they say furtive gestures. I'm pretty sure that 90% of the cops don't know what the word furtive means. It means a secret move, right? So if I was like, and I did that, you'd be like, that looks like a weird thing to do. But it's also, they'll say he made very, very furtive gestures. I'm like, if it was very, very furtive, that would mean you very, very didn't see it. I asked the police officer, and I said, what did he do? He made a very furtive gesture. And I was like, it wasn't just furtive. He's like, no, it was very furtive. And I said, so it was very secret? And he's like, no, it wasn't very secret. I was like, I don't think that word means what you think it means. If police have no suspicion, they are not legally allowed to do anything. If they have a hunch, if it's like, well, it's kind of late, why is that kid walking down the street? I'm gonna stop him, because it just seems a little bit weird. They can't stop you, they can't search you. What they can do, and what they'll attempt to do, is have you sort of agree to the fact that they're stopping you. Right, so they're like, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? Or hey, I need to talk to you for a minute. Or hey, hang on, I wanna ask you a question. Legally, they don't have the power to stop you. In actuality, it's a person with a gun and a radio, and probably another person with a gun and a radio and a car, and the radio's squawking, and you're like, this is a situation that makes me feel nervous.
And impunity.
Yeah, and you feel that they're backed by this impunity, right? But I'm gonna say there's a sort of set of magic words. The first set of magic words is, can I leave? Am I free to go? Right? Am I being detained? Right? Any of those things sort of activate this thing. Because if the police don't have the next level, reasonable suspicion that you just did, you are currently, or you're about to commit a crime, they can't legally stop you. They have to have reasonable suspicion that you are about to, or just did, commit a crime. And reasonable suspicion, means if a reasonable person, I always think of watching it as a movie, if a reasonable person saw what, or knew what the police officer knew at that point, specific articulable facts is what the law says, but that's boring. But if a reasonable person looked at that and said, it looks like a crime just happened there, right? The police can't say, hey, stop. And you say, no, I gotta go, I'm gonna catch my bus is right there. And they're like, no, stay here. They can only do that legally. They do it all the time, but they can only do it legally if they have reasonable suspicion that you just did, are currently, or about to commit a crime. So in Godfather 1, he does the signature thing that's gonna elevate him to be Godfather, which is, he does what? He shoots a cop in an Italian restaurant, right? Let's say you're a cop, you're just a beat cop, and you're about to come in that restaurant. And you hear like, no, you can't, I'm a cop, you can't, pow! And then you see him, you hear thunk, and then he bumps into you. And the cop says, hey, would a reasonable person, knowing that, not in the restaurant, would a reasonable person hearing yelling, pop, thunk, and then a person running? A reasonable person thinks, a crime probably just happened, right? Probably, right? That's actually more, that's probably probable cause, but that's reasonable suspicion. An example that's mostly something that happened to me, I used to live in Mission Hill. I was going to catch the really early bus that leaves from Dudley to go to the airport. And I had like a bag, like a roller bag with me, like kind of big backpack roller bag thing. And I looked and I was like, ooh, it was later than I thought. So I was running and I cut down that little Roxbury Street thing that cuts behind right near the post office by Dudley. And it's basically the back alley to like, there's a bank right there, like a bank parking lot. And I was kind of like running through the edge of a bank parking lot. And it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. And I saw a cop go by and I was like, huh. And I was like, oh, whatever. And I was like still running. And I was like, huh. So I'm in a bank parking lot. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I have a bag and there's no one else there. That's probably not enough. But if you add any one thing to that, it probably is enough. So let's say there's an alarm going off. And the cop's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, no, my bus is there, I gotta go. And they go, no. We're gonna find out what's happening here, right? And so that is probably reasonable suspicion. So, or if, let's say there was broken glass, let's say it was not related to me, but there's broken glass near one of the windows in the bank. that's probably, like you would say, yeah, if you saw that scene in a movie, you'd be like, meh, it's a fair chance, right? So that might be enough. And it also has to be specific to me. So I was actually at UMass Dartmouth, and I was talking to some, it's the Latino Students Association. I think all of them were Black Latino folks. And they were like, I always get stopped, like the campus police stopped me in our parking lot. I said, what time was it? He was like, noon. And I said, what did they stop you for? They said, oh, there was a car that had been broken into. And I said, how many people were there in the parking lot? He was like, oh, there were just like dozens of people all walking around. But there was one car that had a broken window and there was an alarm going off on it. And I said, were you near it? He's like, yeah, but there were people nearer than me. And I said, but they just stopped you. And he said, yeah, they just stopped me. And I was like, yeah, that's not okay. Because there's no specificity. Right? An average person would say that character just committed a crime when you watch the little clip. That's what the standard is supposed to be. However, the police are gonna, a lot of times, add factors that didn't really happen. It's called lying, right? So the police are gonna lie and make up stuff. So really it's what the judge hears and believes. Is that enough to make someone believe that there's reasonable suspicion that a crime was going on at that time? Maybe 1 in 20 times where someone is arrested and you litigate it and you say you should not have been able to search this person, defense attorneys win those. Police don't know the law so well, but they kind of think they do. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times in situations where they don't exactly know what's going on, but the other thing is with all the description stuff, they do all points bulletins. They're like, we're looking for a person with this, and it's on the radio. It's also on this, there's a thing called a CAD, is computer aided dispatch. So it's the computer that's in the cop's car. So it comes across there. And they say, oh, he meant the description. It's like black, young person between 19 and 35 with jeans on. And you're like, what? And also sometimes I'm like, we can have a long conversation about diversity, but when you have that and there's a judge on the stand, and the judge is like matching that description, you're like, I just stand there and I'm like, that was the description? And I look at the judge and I just wait. Like, so do you think that's a specific description, officer? And the officer's like, yeah, that's pretty specific. I'm like, and I just look at the judge and I'm like, what do you want me to do with this? Like, what am I supposed to do? And also I'll say another thing about, it's not a saving grace. It's not like if we have a whole bunch of black judges, that's going to save everything, or a whole bunch of black and brown and other folks that are judges. But another time there was a Boston police officer, a friend of mine was litigating a case, and there was a brand new Boston police officer and then a old school veteran, right? What really happened in the car is they drove by and they passed a bunch of black kids in a car right near Dudley. The veteran goes, pull him over. And the rookie goes, why? And the veteran says, because he was eyeballing us. So the veteran comes in and he's like, well, he drove over the line, we believed he was speeding, and we want to investigate more. So he covers. The rookie comes in and he just doesn't know any better. And he's like, why did you pull the car over? He's like, well, my partner told me to. And he has more experience than me. And he said, why did he tell you to pull him over? And he said, because he was eyeballing. This is like Emmett Till. This is like the most racialized language. And the defense attorney just looked at the judge, the black judge, and looked at the black judge and was like, and the black judge just went and looked at him and it's like, what planet, what decade are you from? That motion to suppress was allowed. I think they found, this was before marijuana was decriminalized, they found, marijuana, and it was 8 or 10 bags of marijuana. And if someone who they think is poor has 8 or 10 bags of marijuana, it's no longer possession, it's possession with intent, because they're like, look, he was trying to sell it and he had $80. Why would this kid ever have $80? He must be a drug dealer. I had a case where someone had $30 and they were arguing she had $30. She must have been, where would she have $30? I'm like, it's $30! You can get it that and a little bit could get you a bus ticket to New York, right? So that's reasonable suspicion that someone is committing a crime or is about to commit a crime. The only thing they can do on reasonable suspicion of a crime is stop you. They can stop you for a reasonable amount of time. So what they can do is investigate. They can start asking questions, be like, where are you? What are you doing? They can call in and be like, does the person really have a blue shirt or is it a purple shirt? And they can't do anything else. They can't frisk you. They can't search you. They can ask you questions. We're gonna get to the second part. You don't have to answer any questions. And not answering any questions can't be a thing that adds to their suspicion, because you have a constitutional right not to answer their questions. So when the police say, where did you come from? Where are you going? The answer, I would suggest, is always, on the advice of my lawyer, I choose not to answer any questions. Or, I don't want to answer any questions. Or I have a Fifth Amendment right, I don't want to answer any questions. Because I can tell you that almost everything that you say, I don't care how smart you are. I say things when the police ask me questions, which happens a lot. I'm like, I don't want to answer any of your questions because it might incriminate me. On the advice of my lawyer, I don't want to answer any questions. I got pulled over in front of the Greek church in Mission Hill. This was probably like 7 or 8 years ago. And it was like late at night. A state trooper pulls me over because I guess that road, that Parker Street right there is a state route. He pulls me over and he said, where do you live? I'm like 2 blocks from my house. It's on my license. And he knows the street. There's no way he wouldn't know the street. And he said, where are you going? I said, I choose not to answer any questions. I don't want to incriminate myself in anything. So Fifth Amendment. And he just like sneered at me. He's like, that's the first time I've ever heard that. And I totally I just said, I hope it isn't the last time.
That's right.
And the thing is, how many people in that 6 years think that state trooper pulled over, stopped a 14-year-old kid? And I hope that 14-year-old kid, maybe I didn't know your rights training for them. And that kid said, on the advice of my attorney or Carl Williams, my attorney, look, I have his card. He told me not to answer any questions. Now that cop cannot say, well, I can't truthfully say, that's the first time I've ever heard that. And it's more likely to be normalized for that police officer. And if we always create, and this is a little bit answering this question, the more we make it normal that these people work for us, that these people are there to protect us, that these people, if I just don't answer your question, that's not a reason to rip me out of the car, it's not a reason to scream at me, that becomes normal. And that isn't going to become normal because we send a bunch of people to a training that is supposed to make people who have sometimes deeply entrenched biases or unconscious biases or conscious biases, because they're like, I just hate people and these type of people. In our resistance to that, it will normalize it, right? And I think that's happening more and more. Like people are like, oh, you're pulling me over, click, I'm gonna record this, right? That if you did, I'll tell you, because I did it 5 years ago. People would freak out, they would start screaming at you, police would start putting their hands on you. But the more normal it has become, the easier it's become to actually do those things physically. Reasonable suspicion of a crime. What can you do? They can just stop you. And the check on that is, are you detaining me? Basically what you're saying is, look at cop, do you think you have reasonable suspicion to stop me? Because I'm calling you on that. I'm saying, do you have enough? So when you say, hey, no, I don't want to, they can always stop you if you consent. Because if I say, hey, can I talk to you? A regular person can do that to another regular person. Say, let's have a conversation, right? So a lot of times they'll characterize it as that. But the thing that you want to do is saying, are you saying that I have to stay here? Do I have to stay here, or is this a friendly thing where you think I'm staying here because I want to, right? So you can say, I want to leave, or no, I'd rather leave. And if they say no, you have to stay, well, then you're facing a person with a gun that's saying you have to stay, and that's a different situation. But now you've at least identified the situation, right? And police will be sometimes a little bit concerned about that. They're like, well, maybe I don't really have anything, and I don't want to say. And it will sometimes, it will terminate the encounter a lot sooner. It also defines a situation where you're aware of what your rights are. So saying, am I free to go? Can I leave? Or whatever thing you're about to, sometimes saying what you're about to do might not be the best thing, right? Because I don't know, what thing you're about to do. Or can I go back to the party? And you're like, oh, because that could be an admission too. If you say the thing that you're gonna, oh, I just left that party and I came, to here and I was going back to the party. Maybe the bad thing that they're looking for was the party. So saying, am I free to leave? Am I being detained? If you think the situation warrants it and you feel up to the sort of task of saying that. So reasonable suspicion of a crime is the first step. With that, the only thing the police can do is detain you. The second step is the police actually being able to touch you. The only way that police can touch you is if they have reasonable suspicion that you're armed, and it's not armed or dangerous, it's armed and dangerous. So they have to think that you have some kind of weapon, and they have to think that you're going to do something dangerous with that it's possible that you would do something dangerous with that weapon. The reason for this is supposedly officer safety and safety of the community. So if the police encounter someone, let's say the person has very serious mental health problems, and they're at a train station and they're screaming at people, and then they say, if someone touches me, I'm going to stab them. And a police officer is standing in front of that person, is it reasonable for that police officer to think that that person has a weapon? If the person just screamed, I'm going to stab the next person who comes up to me. It's I will say that, yes, that's going to pass the test to think that it's reasonable that that person might have And it's reasonable to think, if they're saying that, it's reasonable to think that they're dangerous. So with that, the only thing that the police can do is a quick pat down of the person's outer clothing. And they can't do it for to see if you just robbed the bank, to see if you have the money in your pockets. They can't do it to see if you have drugs in your pockets. The only thing that they can look for is weapons that are dangerous. I actually once won a case because the judge said, well, I believe that the officer thought that he had a weapon, but I don't believe that he thought the guy was dangerous. Because the cop actually testified. He was like, oh, I know this neighborhood, I know him really well. He's like, he'd never heard a fly. He said that on the stand. But he picked up his backpack. He took the guy was on a bike, and the guy took off his backpack and he handed it to the cop. And when the cop took the backpack, there was a pair of bolt cutters in it. And the cop, it's true because my client said it was true, and the cop said it was true, so I'm assuming it was true. He grabbed the backpack and he felt the bolt cutters, and he said, right when I grabbed it, I thought there was a shotgun in there, so I opened the bag, but then he found bolt cutters, and then someone had been stealing bikes, and my client got charged with a whole bunch of stuff. And I said, Judge, he should have never been able to open his backpack. And he's like, counsel, he held the backpack, and he said when he touched the backpack, he thought it was a shotgun. He's like, how is that not enough that he's armed and dangerous? I said, granted, he thought he was armed. And the judge looked at me and he's like, come on. And I said, Judge, that police officer sat on the stand and looked at me and looked at you and said, I've known him for 15 years. He's never hurt anybody. I've never been afraid of him. How could any reasonable person, given that information that police officer knew, ever think that he was dangerous? He said that he didn't think he was dangerous. The judge just went and looked at the prosecutor, and the prosecutor went like, well, and then tried to make some argument, and I was like, keep going. And he's like, I'm gonna allow it. And even if they don't have enough, they'll say, can I look in your bag? Or, you don't have any weapons on you. You don't mind if I search, do you? What they're doing is trying to get you to agree to it. You're not actually agreeing to it, but what you should say is, I don't consent to any search. They might do it, but you say, look at it. I'm not consenting to staying here. I'm also not consenting to you searching me, right? And those two things make it clear that I'm like, oops. So saying I don't consent to a search, and at some point saying, can I leave? Am I free to go? And also, I don't want to answer any questions, or Fifth Amendment. Those are three things that we would say are magic words. Police always have these magic fingers. They're like, oh, I felt his body, and I felt the pills in his pocket, and I knew that they were legal. I was like, the person had jeans on, and you did a quick pat frisk of their body, and you felt pills in someone's, or they're like, I felt the marijuana because it was a green leafy material. I was like, what? I'm gonna bring 20 pairs of jeans in here and put various shit in the jean pockets and have you find pills and drugs, and they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. But judges would be like, oh, I've heard that before, because they hear 20 cops lie to it, and then they're like, oh, yeah, you could do that. There's a pat frisk, right? What's called a Terry search also, just patting someone down like you've seen on TV and a million times in the movies. That's the thing. If they believe that you're armed and dangerous, they can do that. So there's reasonable suspicion of a crime, they can stop you. Reasonable suspicion that you're armed and dangerous, they can frisk you. A full-on search, that's they can look in your pockets, they could do a strip search, they could look in your bag, they could look in your shoes, they could look in your glove compartment, your trunk, if there's probable cause. If you ask me what probable cause is, I'll say, I don't know, it's more than reasonable suspicion. What it means is that a reasonable person would think you probably committed a crime. Not that it's reasonable to think that you did, that it's probable that you did. I don't know, 40%, 50%, likely. There's no real number, but I just make those up. So probable cause is just something more than reasonable suspicion. If they have reasonable suspicion, then they can search you. In that, they could look in your pockets. There was a call for domestic violence. Police show up on the scene. There's a guy there. They're not sure. Someone was yelling at kind of threatening a woman in her apartment building, an ex or something. So they come up. There's a guy there. They're actually not sure if it's the guy. So they come up and they start talking to him. Right at this point, it's a consensual encounter because they don't really. And the guy says, okay, because no one told him to say hey, am I free to go? Which this guy would have been in a much better situation because he wasn't the person related to the meth. He was just a guy there. So they start asking him questions, and he's like, no, blah blah blah. No, I don't know who that is. And he's answering all their questions. While that's happening, the police get a call on their radio, and they're like, oh, there was just an unarmed robbery where someone stole an iPod, and they all did an iPod device was stolen. And while they're talking to this guy, they look, and he has an iPod, and at this point, this is kind of iPods were fairly new thing. He has an iPod in his belt, and they're like, they look and they're like, oh my God, this is the iPod thief guy. And they're like, can I see that? So he shows it to them. He gives it to them, like, which he shouldn't have done. And they went click, 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 which, this is a cop that is not incredibly dumb. He looks and he goes, and he clicks through stuff and he's like, what's your favorite song? And I was like, ooh, that's a good question. I was like, you do not want to be in this situation, right? And the guy got arrested because it seemingly wasn't his iPod. But had he done the 2 or 3 things that you would have done at this point, because he would have said, hey, I want to go. Like, are you saying I have to stay here? And if they said, can I look in your bag? You say, I don't consent to a search. And I'd say, I really want to look in your bag. You don't have a gun in your bag, do you? I just want to look in your bag.
I don't consent to a search.
Yeah. And then the other reason I would say is because a lot of times this happened there was a homeless guy in near Boston University. He did the same thing, and he had found the laptop was trashed. Someone threw it away. He had been looking through dumpsters. He found a laptop. It's totally broken. And the cops stopped him, and there was no report of anything stolen. But they told him at the scene, they were like, this isn't yours, you couldn't afford this. They said this to him, Boston police. And they arrested him. He was on probation for some other things, so his probation officer was like, the cops arrested you, well, we're gonna violate you on probation. So he's jammed up in all of this now. He's held, right, and he can't make bail. So he stays in for 3 weeks, and then he tells his lawyer, he's like, can I just plead to it, and they'll just put me on more probation and give him time served? And literally, there's no person that has ever said, hi, my laptop was stolen. And it's a laptop. I mean, you could just turn it on and be like, it's going to say someone's name in there somewhere. And so he pled to it. They called us and they were like, this happened, it shouldn't have happened. And I'm like, wait a minute, you called us after he pled to it? I'm like, that's not, so you stood up in court and said, yes, I did that. And he's like, yeah, I wanted to get out.
Yeah.
But had he, in the beginning, if he could have said, look, I don't want to answer this question, I don't consent to a search, can I leave? Sometimes those things would work, sometimes they won't. Police need a warrant to go in a house in general, or a car in general. However, there's a bunch of exceptions for cars, so it gets complicated. Usually, if they think that there's a crime going on, they can search parts of a car, like the trunk, the glove compartment, if they just have probable cause. Houses, unless there's a pretty strict exceptions, police cannot come into someone's house. What we recommend, certainly for on immigration reasons, is if police knock on the door and they say, we have a warrant, you should ask to see the warrant. If you look at a warrant, there are different kinds of warrants. There are things that are kind of called, there are ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, have things, I just started talking about warrants. So in general, you should ask to see the warrant. A warrant has to describe what the premises to be searched with particularity. So it can't just say the apartment building on 101 Main Street. It has to say something like unit or some subsection of that. And you can ask to see that. It should be, the dates should be relevant. Sometimes there are no knock warrants that are allowed, which the police can just break in on. If the warrant says that they can search a particular place, they are judicially allowed to search that place. It's grabbable areas. If the police are going to go into this space, right? Let's say they can search this room. Most of the time it would say this whole space, but if it said this room, which would be weird normally, because if it's an apartment and it's for drugs or guns or money or maybe it's some collar crime and it's record, documents, they're not going to say well, you can only search the office there. It's they're going to be you can go in the bathroom and search, because what if they put all the documents in the bathroom? But if they could only search this room, if there are people there, they can do, because of the kind of armed and dangerous thing, going into someone's residence or business is generally considered a sort of dangerous thing anyway. If there are places where, let's say there's an umbrella stand by the front door, and that's where they're coming in and out of, they could look through the umbrella stand just to see if there's not a shotgun sticking out of it or something. They can't, so in generally what are called grabbable areas, which is a kind of a complicated, it's a little bit what you can think. If they're in places, walking through places where someone could grab a gun or a knife or an axe or pepper spray or a taser, they can look in those to see if there's a weapon. If it's a closet down the hall away from where they're searching, they can't do that. If it's a closed bedroom and there's a bureau in there, they can't do that. But usually residential warrants will be for the whole apartment. what we're talking about is resisting police violence, right? And keeping ourselves safe. There's 0 and there's 10, right? I'll say for me, I was leaving work. There's 2 different incidents, maybe 3 different incidents this happened. I'm leaving work. I work with a whole bunch of lawyers that are like civil rights all the time. I'm like 5 blocks away I'm at downtown Crossing. I see a bunch of cops. I try to walk down the stairs. I almost trip on these people because it's like steep stairs and like there are just all these, I'm running downstairs and there are these people and I stop short. And I'm sort of like, what are you doing like in the middle of the stairs? And I look and there's like 4 like kind of like burly like white guys in like just like jeans and t-shirts. And I look and I was like, that guy has a gun. And I'm like, wait, what the hell is going on? And I see like, there's like 4 guys sitting in the middle and they look like, you know, a little bit scruffier. And I'm like, oh, and they're like papers, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, oh, these are just cops like harassing people because they were just hanging out because it was a little bit colder and they were hanging out in the train station, which is completely legal. So I look and I'm like, ah. So I take my phone out and I start recording, right? And one of the guys looks up at me and he's like really happy about that. One of the people was getting a hard time. And then the police officer, like later when I watch it, he's like, you need to stop blocking the stairs. I'm like, I'm not blocking. I'm like, you guys are sitting up there. You're standing in the whole way. I'm like, I'm not blocking this. He's like, you need to back up. He said, I don't mind you recording. And I'm like, I don't think it matters whether you mind or not. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I have a constitutional right, which I do, First Amendment, to do this. So I actually move a little bit. I'm like, I'm not blocking the stairs. He's like, you're blocking the stairs. I'm like, I'm not blocking. And I was leaning, there's an escalator, and I was leaning on the side of the escalator. I'm like, I'm not blocking anything. You can do whatever you want. So I just keep recording. And sort of at that point, I was like on a 8 or a 9, right? Because I'm like, look, if I get arrested, there's like, honestly, there's gonna be like 10 lawyers. Like before I get to the police station, there's gonna be 10 lawyers there. And they're gonna be like, we're suing everybody. That's what's gonna happen right now. And that's like just a privilege of me. Also, me personally, I'm like, you better wish you don't, right? To me, like even whatever with all those, even if all those folks don't show up, you better wish you don't. So there's that, like given my privilege, where I am, when I am, I'm on like a 8. I think that people should decide what your level of resistance is. And it's different at different times. But I'll say what happens so often is people are like, oh, I'm gonna be on a 2, I'm gonna be really nice. And then police officer comes up and they're like, da-da-da-da, and they're like, you're like, whoa. And now you're on an 8 and you didn't wanna be on an 8, right? But to really think about it that way, like scale of 1 to 10, how do you want this interaction to go? Like, what do you need to do? Where do you need to be? Are you on probation and parole and you got 4 warrants out? Different thing that how you might want to respond. When I talk to kids in high school and middle school, I actually do this as an example. I do this thing because I don't know, when I was in high school, this happened all the time. You know, like you'd be walking down the hall, there was this kid, Kevin Meridian, and there was this long hall in the basement. I would always walk down. That kid would be like on this side of the hall, and he would come all the way over to the side of the hall, and he would go every time I would walk down there. I would always walk down that hall. I'm like, I know he's going to be in the hall. I know he's going to be here. It's very much like that. Like you could say, look, you know what? You're wrong. You're wrong. He was took like 80 years of Taekwondo. I think he owns a Taekwondo studio now, so he would probably kick my ass. He definitely would have. But he would always do that because he was a bully. He was also like 3. I was a freshman. You think he was a senior? I was like, you got it. Like, what is your issue, dude? And but the same thing with the police. You're saying like, there just comes a time and you're like, look you're wrong. What you're doing is wrong. I have rights. You can't treat me like this, and I'm not going to answer your question. And with me in high school, it's the same thing. You could say, you know what? I never did this, right? You could say, you know what? The thing that you're doing is wrong. You need to stop doing it. I'm not going to get in a fight with you, but what you're doing is wrong. Just stop. Is it more likely that I'm going to get kicked in the face? Mm-hmm. Probably. But is it also in some ways possibly to like going to end it forever? And it is actually justice. Like people like, tell me the answer. And I'm like, you already know the answer. You already know. And I'm like, if you're in high school and middle school, kids know. If you walk on here, right here, every kid that lives in this neighborhood knows. If you're more than like 11, you know, right? You're like, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you say, look, I'm not gonna take it, and I'm gonna say what you're doing is wrong, and sometimes you don't. And the consequences in the long run are, we are free. We are people who live in this country and we are free. That's one, because someone told me, like, you can never do that. You have to do everything the police say. I was like, if that were the case for black people in this country, we wouldn't not be free. Like, for the black people in the room, the brown people in the room, we would not be free. We would not be free for a double negative. We would not exist. So that resistance is existential. And they said they had met some of the folks who protested on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And they said, they asked Representative Lewis, and they said, you know, what did your mother think of what you did? And he said, oh, my mother said, she said, never, I'm terrified, you need to never go out again. And she said, as a black mother, you know, that's what I would tell my kid. And I said, if John Lewis didn't march on that bridge, what do you think you would be? I was like, how many black people do you think did that before they went across that bridge? I'll tell you the number is 0. It's like now it's almost 0 too, but it's like 1, right? So we have 1 since then. And I think that thing, like someone said, well, it's not safe to be on a 10. And I was like, it damn sure ain't safe to be on a 0. The average black person in the United States dies 8 years sooner. That's just straight up, that's if you live your whole damn life. That's like if someone didn't shoot you. That's like if you're not put in an economic situation where, you know, you can't get housing, you can't get healthcare, you can't get pain medication. You live in Roxbury, and I did that, I was at Wake the Earth, I did the blow test, like the thing you blow in a long time ago. Woman looked at me, she said, how many packs of cigarettes you smoke? I said, I never smoked a cigarette in my life, I'm a vegan, and I was like, I've never done any drug in mine, I don't drink alcohol. She's like, where do you live? I said, Roxbury. She's like, same as she said, same as 2 packs a day. And I'm like, yeah, and I was like, damn, right? Yeah, no, she said 2 packs a day, right? And I'm like, how am I supposed to go? I'm supposed to go to Beacon Hill? Beacon Hill, I'm gonna get stopped every day by a cop. They're gonna be like, you don't live here? ACLU of Massachusetts represented a guy who was walking across Boston Common in late 2010, 2010 I think. And he saw the bike police, Boston Police Special Division bike police pretty seriously beating what looked like a homeless person. He came up, he held his camera up. Most cameras didn't have video at the time. So the police were like, oh, are you taking pictures? And he's like, no, video. And they said, are you recording audio? And he said, yeah. And then they were like, click, click, they arrested him. There's a wiretap statute, which makes it illegal to secretly, without consent, it has to be both of those things, it has to be secret and without consent, record a person. He got arrested and charged with that, which is a felony. The case got thrown out of Boston Municipal Court. The ACLU, with the law office of Howard and Friedman, a guy named David Milton, litigated the case with my coworker Sarah Wunsch. They sued the police for that in a case called Glick versus Cuniff. That went up to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which is like 1 step below the United States Supreme Court. And the First Circuit said, you have a constitutional right to record the police when they're doing public activities.
Audio also.
To record, yeah, to audio record. Because video record, actually just taking images is not, that's completely protected anyway. I mean, it's not protected, it's just not illegal. There's no law against it. The audio is what the law is against. There's what their reputation is in their minds.
Right.
I was at an event, Boston Police Department said, we just were awarded, President Obama just gave us an award for the best community policing in the country. That's what was said. I was like, whoa, that happened? I was like, I thought we would know if that happened. I went up and looked for it. I spent like hours looking for it. And I had an intern, I was like, find this thing. I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. I found a thing, and there was an event at the White House with Obama, and they had a bunch of police there, and it was the police departments in the country that had most improved their community policing. And I said, if your kid was the most improved grades in class, and you're talking to someone else whose kid has all A's, and you're like, my kid is the most improved, and the other person was like, my kid has all A's, so there's no improving. Like I don't know what that you mean. It must mean you were not as good and you got better. And also that gap, you might have went from like a D minus to like a C minus, and you're like, that's the biggest jump anyone has made this semester. But that is actually something that's poignant, right? They characterized that as we're the best in community policing in the country.
Wow.
The Obama administration publicly said one of the most improved police departments in the country. Those are very different things. Yeah, and I'll say this, I've been to like a lot of things nationally, and like I've met with ACLU colleagues all over the country, and I say, you know, I ask people like, what do you think of the Boston Police Department? I'm like, I don't know. And I've asked even some like former police officers who work with, you know, like drafting policies and procedures to, you know, support civil rights and to like lobby city, states, and police departments to change policies. They're like, I don't know about Boston police being that. But here, like you hear some folks on city council and a lot of folks in the Boston Police Department were like, oh, we're the best police department in the country. Everyone, you know, everybody knows that. And people say, oh, well, everybody of course knows, you know, the Boston Police Department is the best police department in the country. And I'm like, I've never, ever, outside of the city of Boston, singularly heard a person say that.
Maybe it's compared to the state police or the MBTA police.
I mean, but they'll say it now. They act like it's a national thing. They act like we're the greatest in the world. The other thing is, I mean, that's like saying, like someone who's abusive saying, well, look at my neighbors, look at how abusive they are. Like, but that's not the standard. Like, you don't get to say, like, look, those people over there murdered 8 people. Like, so you look at us. We've only killed whatever, how many, 5 or 6 black people in the last 5 or 6 years, right? I mean, and this has happened, right? So like, we can look at the bodies, right? There are people that did not have guns that the Boston police have shot and killed, and most of these things have been, the district attorney's office said, yeah, it looks fine to us, right? So the ACLU plug again, the ACLU came out with a report on the stop and frisk policies. It's really more than stop and frisk. It's stop, frisk, searches, interrogations. Sometimes they're just called observations, where the police like roll up on a playground and they're like, oh, we know that guy, he's involved with this organization, the street organization. And they'll write down, they're like, oh, they're hanging out with this person. Like, we didn't know, like, who's that person? And they'll write things out. So sometimes they're not actually physical encounters, but it's 200,000, over 200,000 of those encounters. And some data scientists looked at that who are generally do contract work for the police. So it wasn't us. Like, it wasn't me doing the numbers. I'm not that good at math. But they did the numbers, and it showed that if you live in a black neighborhood, even if you control for crime, even if you control for gang membership, you're more likely to be stopped. Even if you say, okay, this neighborhood has 75% more crime, right? Even if you control for that, you see that people get stopped more, and also those stops are more likely to be because now we know, stop, frisk, full-on search. You're more likely to be stopped more, you're more likely to have that stop be more invasive on that sort of chart, and you're more likely to be repeat stopped. If you live in black neighborhoods, if you're black, if you live in Latino neighborhoods, or if you're Latino. So even if you're not, so if you're in a Latino neighborhood, it's more likely. If you're in a black neighborhood, control for every other possible. They tried to say, maybe it's because rookies stop people more. Maybe it's because white officers stop. Maybe because it's black officers stop people more. Maybe it's because, black officers stop white people more. And they tried to control for all these different factors. And one of the controlling factors is how black or how Latino the neighborhood you are in is, and what your race is. And those things are statistically significant level. After studying, it's not like studying 20, this is studying 208,000 records over a 4-year period. That there's never been a satisfactory answer from the Boston Police Department, but they said we got better. The recent numbers, they haven't been fully analyzed, but the recent numbers don't particularly show that the disparities, the numbers have sort of gone down a little bit, but the disparity we haven't seen improve. Also, it seems hard for it to improve when no one admits it's a problem. And that hasn't really been done. And that makes me, I'll say this in a positive way, that makes me hopeful for the day when it is done. So the thing I think is, we resist, people have tons of organizations, horses keeping you guys to the grindstone. And the one thing I'll say is, when it happens to us who have some more privileges, that's us acting in solidarity with people may never see or may never know, because when the cop does that to me and I record it, I say, I'm not gonna consent to this, I don't wanna answer that question, that you're protecting someone. Literally, you might be making it so someone doesn't get beaten or someone doesn't get shot, because the person's gonna be like, look, I don't wanna answer your question, I'm just gonna go. And instead of, Sandra Bland's situation, and not to say that any of those people, it was their fault, but if we all resisted to whatever degree we feel comfortable with all of the time,
That's right.
they would not be able to do this. People would not be able to treat us like this. And people would be more free.
That's right.
And it's up to us.